Hello and welcome everybody to today's event. We have a lot of exciting and insightful material to cover today. I'm sure everyone will walk away with great ideas for how they can improve compliance and scheduling and how that can help their organizations. As Paul mentioned, I'm Jim McGady. I'm the head of marketing for ADP's workforce management business. Before we jump into it, there are a few notes about today's presentation. The presentation is not legal or tax advice. Before taking any action on the information in this presentation, employers should review this material with their counsel. And keep in mind that what we're discussing today is not the final word on any of these topics. And also, nothing is intended to be a political opinion. At ADP, our role is to assist employers with their human capital management needs and their compliance responsibilities. So we've got a lot of great, valuable insights to share with you today, and joining me to do so are my colleagues at ADP, Dan Hennis and Michael Grasso. Dan Hennis is the VP of Product Management. He's been doing product management at ADP for 8 years, and he's led the workforce management product portfolio for the last 4 years. And Michael has joined ADP in 2021 and provides legal guidance to ADP's workforce management group. Prior to joining ADP, he was in private practice for almost 18 years with an international firm representing employers in employment matters with a focus on wage and hour issues. And again, I'm Jim McGady. I've been with ADP managing the workforce management marketing efforts for almost 8 years now. And I've spent my entire career helping organizations use software to better manage their people and improve their business results. That's exactly what we hope to do for you today. Our discussion today is focused on wage and hour compliance within the realm of workforce management practices and technology. Your time and attendance management practices are central to so many wage and hour compliance matters, and time and attendance touches your entire workforce, whether people are exempt or non-exempt, whether they're full-time or part-time, contractors or employees. There's so many areas of compliance impacted, and that includes correctly calculating the time that people have worked, managing their absences, how people are scheduled, even how people's information is handled. So today, as we discuss compliance topics, we'll share how some of the latest workforce management trends and technologies are playing a role in that compliance. So our hope is that we can help you find ways to simplify compliance, whether that's through better ways to apply the rules or to manage your business processes so that in turn you'll be able to improve payroll accuracy. After all, accurate payroll begins with accurate timekeeping and accurate data. You'll also be able to control labor costs because for most of you, labor is your largest controllable expense, and for most of you, you need better visibility. And by focusing on compliance, you can also turn your attention to boosting productivity by being able to put the right people in the right place at the right time so they can deliver better results. And the truth is that until you get compliance right, it's really hard for you and your frontline leaders to focus on those other business results. So a little bit more about what you'll hear today are some trends. So to call compliance a trend may not be entirely accurate here since it never really ends, but it is always evolving. So today we'll cover some of the latest compliance developments. And you'll also hear about a few other trends we're seeing, including the desire that employees have for more flexible scheduling, for faster access to their pay, and how organizations like yours are handling challenges that come with people returning to the workplace, working remotely, and in many cases choosing not to return at all, which for many of you is contributing to labor shortages. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael for our first compliance topic. Michael.
Great, and thank you, Jim. So as we emerge from the pandemic, wage and hour issues will undoubtedly continue to be a focus of employment-related claims. Wage and hour claims have evolved across industries, along with the extensive changes in technology over the past couple of decades. The pandemic has caused a shift in the mindset of workers and companies as they continue to redefine how work is performed. We learned in early 2020 that many traditional work arrangements could be performed remotely, and technology continues to evolve to allow for a changing work model. There's no reason to think that these claims won't continue to evolve and even expand as companies offer hybrid and remote work arrangements that employees are looking for. It's possible that the shift to hybrid or remote work models will further accelerate private claims and even trigger more compliance investigations by state and federal departments of labor. Employees must keep in mind that the Fair Labor Standards Act, also known as the FLSA, and many state wage and hour laws are enticing claims for attorneys to bring against companies. One reason is that they're often brought on a class-wide basis, meaning that one employee can attempt to bring a claim on behalf of all impacted employees. This can raise potential exposure and costs to defend these cases exponentially and often lead to an early resolution. Also, in recent years, many states have amended or enacted wage and hour laws that allow employees to recover double or even treble damages, which could mean that they're able to recover $2 for every $1 owed in back wages, plus their attorney's fees. Some of the statutes even have statute of limitation periods going back for up to 6 years. And even without private litigation, governmental investigations and audits can be a tremendous strain on company resources. Investigations can be far-reaching, and they cover multiple locations and multiple wage and hour issues, even if no complaint has been filed by somebody. So the bottom line is that compliance failures can be extremely costly, either from private litigation or as the result of an agency investigation. And the smallest violations can add up quickly. And that's in addition to the strain on other resources and the distraction that you'll have from running your businesses. So on the next slide, we'll talk about how compliance is a bit of a moving target. Sometimes it seems as though there's new legislation every day requiring employers to change their practices and be in compliance on very short notice. Many of these changes are at the state and local level, making it difficult for companies with a geographically diverse workforce to stay on top of the ever-changing compliance landscape. These changes run the gamut. It could be from a new minimum wage in San Francisco, paid sick leave in New Jersey, new scheduling requirements in New York City, or nationwide changes to the minimum salary levels that impact the availability of overtime to a large portion of your workforce. There's so many new regulations that it's hard to keep up. That's why it's important to leverage your technology and automate processes that can be adapted quickly as laws change and with minimal manual processes to help eliminate mistakes. So let's talk about some of the various compliance challenges employers face. As I said, having the right workforce management system in place helps employers comply with the law and record-keeping requirements. This slide shows just some of the common areas where employers often face compliance scrutiny. These areas are where compliance may be difficult to maintain because of changes in state and federal law, and in some cases, even local ordinances. Of all these areas, minimum wage is probably the most straightforward compliance issue for most organizations. Changes to minimum wage are often well publicized and get a lot of attention. I'd say that compliance with the minimum wage more often becomes an issue for companies that have alternative pay arrangements that are not based on a set hourly rate of pay. So for example, companies that pay piece rates, commissions, or some other variable pay method. When it comes to minimum wage, if you're using one of these different compensation methods, you need to take special care to make sure that the derived hourly rate is at least the minimum wage rate in effect in each jurisdiction where you have employees working, And then if the hourly rate, which you might hear me call the regular rate, is less than the minimum wage, you must make up the difference. So the remaining items fall into what I like to think of as two different buckets. The first bucket deals with special pay rates or special pay rules. And in this bucket, I include split shifts, shift premiums, holiday pay, reporting time pay. The second bucket can be thought of as hourly worked considerations, and that includes on-call time, meal and rest break, and travel time. Now, there are federal regulations governing on-call time, with nearly half of the states having their own rules and regulations, and there's no federal law requiring meal and break times. Federal law really just provides that breaks that are less than 20 minutes must be paid, and that breaks that are greater than 30 minutes need not be paid. However, nearly half of all states have statutes or regulations requiring employers to provide meal and or rest periods. These rules can vary a great deal from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, both in terms of the number of breaks required and also the timing of the breaks. Some jurisdictions like California and Colorado have set penalties that are payable to the employee when they don't receive a proper meal or rest break. It's also worth noting that just this week, the California Supreme Court held that meal break penalties, which California refers to as premiums, can form the basis for pay statement and late wage payment claims. And for those of you with operations in California, you already know that these claims are quite familiar and they are very costly and very difficult to avoid. Finally, there are overtime considerations. So federal law requires employees receive 1.5 times their regular rate for all hours worked over 40 in a work week. And then you have states like California that have daily overtime requirements. Each of the buckets that I've described can also impact the overtime calculation, either in terms of whether additional hours need to be included as hours worked, or whether certain pay rates or rules need to be included in calculating the regular rate for the overtime premium. In the next slide, we'll focus on a few more of these areas and the challenges that have been created by a hybrid work environment. So those areas where employers often face compliance challenges, especially in a hybrid or remote workforce model, are overtime, hours worked, meal and rest breaks. Now, there are certainly other areas that are just as challenging, but these three areas stick out in particular. As we discussed, the concepts are seemingly pretty straightforward, but they can vary a great deal depending on what jurisdiction you're in. Hours worked under federal law generally just includes all time an employee is permitted to perform work and the employer knew or should have known that the employee was working. State laws are pretty similar with some variations, but that's pretty straightforward. Then we have overtime that governs when an employee is owed overtime premiums. And generally that means non-exempt employees are paid time and a half their regular rate of pay for all hours over 40, or like in California, over 8 hours in a day. It can get more complicated when employees have multiple rates of pay, either commissions, piece rate, but the concept is also fairly basic. And then finally, the meal and rest breaks. Neither are required under federal laws we've already discussed, but some states have additional requirements or penalties for when you don't follow the law. So what makes compliance with these various areas difficult? In addition to keeping track of the requirements of state and federal law, we have to keep in mind that the FLSA was passed in 1938 to provide a minimum hourly rate of pay, which at the time was 25 cents an hour, if you can believe it. And it put in place a premium rate for overtime. Now, interestingly, one of the primary reasons for overtime pay was not to reward employees working these extra hours as we commonly think of it, but it was intended to create jobs by incentivizing employers to hire additional employees, excuse me, Uh, I'm sorry, I lost you there. To help by incentivizing employers to hire additional employees and create jobs, not drive up labor costs. At this point, the U.S. was on the heels of the Great Depression, and just 5 years earlier, there was nearly 25% unemployment. So this little history lesson might be interesting to some of you, but really to put things in historical context, the FLSA was enacted during a period of time when people worked in factories or fixed locations, and most state laws are modeled after the FLSA. The application of wage and hour laws were straightforward. Nobody ever contemplated that technology would change the way we work, or that one day employees might be able to perform their jobs from home, a coffee shop, or even sitting on the beach. As the way we work and where we work continues to change, companies with traditional work models need to adapt to these changes because even the most simple processes like recording start and stop time, ensuring employees take their meal and rest breaks, preventing employees from working off the clock becomes a much greater challenge and with increasing liability when you get things wrong. Employers must leverage technology to provide their workforce with an easy and effective way to manage their time and meet their compliance obligations. In addition to tracking the amount of time employees work, it may be just as important to track where the employee performs this work because it can impact the tax treatment of their wages because they might live in one state but work in another. We're now going to hear about some additional considerations for hybrid workforces.
Thanks, Michael. Over the last 2 years, it's safe to say that everyone's lives probably have changed. Changes span, your daily routine, your childcare setup, maybe the hours you're working, and definitely the interperson interaction that happens. Employees had this newfound flexibility. For example, before COVID, I never had breakfast with my kids during the week. Now it's part of my daily routine. Even if I'm going to the office, I have breakfast at home with them. As most companies are looking to return to the workplace or have already returned to the workplace in some capacity, they want a way to offer their employees the best of both worlds. Get that in-person interaction, but also maintain some of that flexibility. And we're seeing more and more companies pivoting away from that 5-day work week in the office to some sort of hybrid approach, consisting of some working from home and some time working from the office. And it's really important to set expectations from the start. How many days in the office and how many at home? Can the employees pick their days and can they change it up week to week? At ADP, we came back on a 3-2 schedule. 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. There's no requirements on what days you need to be where, and you can kind of choose as you wish. But by far, Mondays and Fridays have the lowest in-office attendance. And is it important that you know where your employees are working? Some companies, it's critical to know if people are working in the office or at home, while others it might not matter. And if you have clocking employees, those who punch in and out, you can leverage geolocation to see where they're located. Historically, many companies have used geofencing on punching in and out because they wanted their employees to be on site when work started and when work ended. But with flexible working environments now and industries also like construction and home healthcare, we've seen the growth of a concept called geopinning, which lets employees clock in and out from anywhere. And you can see it on a map. So an employee, can clock in at home and a manager can look at a map and see exactly where they are. One thing we've also seen is really the attempt to maximize the in-person interaction in the office. Some companies are dictating, what days people want to be in the meeting. They want people to be in the office for meetings, main meeting days is what some call it, or even core working hours in the office, let alone what days, but hey, you need to be here in the middle of the day. These are all things which you can consider as you're making that transition into a hybrid work environment. Another trend we're seeing is around pay. And payroll itself is undergoing a revolution. Employees are paying closer attention than ever to their earnings. And a study I just read, more than 64% of workers said they're living paycheck to paycheck. And more than half of them are saying that financial stress is impacting their work and their home life. Employees are starting to ask for insight. They want to know what they've earned. They want the transparency into how you go from your gross wages to your net pay, what's actually in your paycheck. And rather than waiting until payday to access what they've earned, they want access earlier. And there's a couple of concepts here. The first is early access to pay. So this is the worker's ability to ask for and receive a portion of their earned but unpaid wages. You know, this could be an hourly worker gets a portion of their earned wages for an emergency expense, and maybe they have to pay a small fee to do that. Typically, this would be funded by a third party. The other option is on-demand pay, and this is where a worker might ask for their full earned wages when they want it. Let's say you're a salary worker, and you have your earned wages to date, and you're going on vacation. You're going to ask for that money to be deposited so you have that. And this could be third-party or employer-funded. But this is what we're starting to see, are these asks from employees for greater access to their pay. So you might be asking kind of what's the connection between faster pay and workforce management? Well, really, the connection between workforce management is in order to get real-time pay, you need to know the hours worked. From an employee perspective, not only do they want to know their gross amounts, but they actually want to know the net amounts in their take-home pay. Jim, can you go to the next slide? I think you're still on the previous slide. There you go. Okay, thank you. So one of the things that we've been working on here is kind of a next-gen workforce management engine that interfaces with our next-gen payroll engine. The two systems are tightly integrated and can continuously calculate your pay in real time based on your actual time punches. So think about this. An employee clocks in the morning, they work all day, take their lunch, clock out at night. They'll be able to see their gross pay, and this includes how it was calculated, including overtime and premium pay. It shows you your deductions, it shows you your taxes, and it's totally transparent to the employee to see how they got from their gross pay to their net pay. And we call this real-time hours to gross to net.
That is all a fantastic insight, Dan and Michael. You know, I think that in the spirit of this webinar, you know, and wanting to help our audience think about ways to be proactive, those were a couple of really good examples. Obviously, staying on top of compliance, but also being able to, you know, just think about some of those new technologies that are out there and that they can use to try to align with some of these trends that we're seeing. So, with this, I'd like to bring us to our first poll. The question for this poll is time and attendance accuracy becoming more important in mitigating payroll errors? And it's a simple yes or no. So you'll see the poll question and take a moment to answer. That should pop up on your screens. And I'll give a few seconds here for people to respond. And Paul, when you're ready, we can share the results. Actually, let's see. Great. It says the poll has ended, perfect timing. And wow, 91% have said that it's becoming more important in mitigating payroll errors. So I think we're definitely on point with our topic here today. I'm going to just share a little bit more data here before we turn on to our next compliance topic. And so this is consistent, again, with what the poll just revealed for us, and that is that when you look at our when you look at some recent research, that ADP has conducted, we've seen a lot of really interesting trends. So 67% of people have agreed and said that time and attendance accuracy is becoming very important in mitigating payroll errors. 73% say integration is a key part of making sure that payroll and time are integrated, are a key part towards improving accuracy. And one of the things that we thought was interesting was in a poll conducted only last year after the pandemic and a lot of people's work had changed, is that 45% of workers say they're paying closer attention than before. So when you think of something like Dan just showed, the ability to go into a time card and see what your gross to net is and confirm that that's accurate before payroll is run, it saves everybody a lot of headaches, especially the payroll administrators out there who may have run payroll, and it isn't until people see their pay stubs that they realize there's been a mistake and they have to go in and correct the error. So definitely try to take advantage of some of those newer best practices. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Michael for our next topic on leave and absence compliance. Michael?
Thanks, Jim. So another thing we gained appreciation for during the pandemic is the need for time off, not just to care for ourselves, but also for family members. Laws like the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, and other state law equivalents have been around for well over 20 years, but in recent years, we've seen additional mandated time off requirements enacted in several states and various jurisdictions. The pandemic has also accelerated additional state and localities to pass their own leave laws that provide minimum paid sick and other types of leave time for all employees. In recent years, and going back prior to the pandemic, there's been a substantial increase in the number of states and localities enacting laws and ordinances mandating certain leave requirements, including paid sick leave. These laws, while often couched as sick leave laws, may go far beyond providing for paid time off for an employee's own illness. These laws often provide time off to care for family members, and in some cases, they permit employees to use this time for activities unrelated to illnesses, such as attending school meetings. During the pandemic, the amendments to the FMLA and other state laws to address the unprecedented impact of COVID-19 had changes that allowed for paid time off for an employee's own exposure or illness from COVID-19, the need to care for a family member who was ill, or to care for children who couldn't attend school because they were closed because of the COVID. While many of these COVID-related leave laws have expired, we continue to see state laws being enacted to mandate paid sick or family leave to employees, and they typically apply to all employers regardless of size and apply to full and part-time employees alike. Compliance with these laws, and especially for multi-state employers, can be confusing and difficult to meet. These laws have very broad applicability to different types of leave and require the accrual of leave based on hours worked, or sometimes by front-loading leave time in order to allow employees to have access to this time immediately. In addition to mandating the amount of time an employee is entitled to, the permitted reasons for using the time, and these laws often contain complex basis for leave or record-keeping requirements. Other differences between the various laws may include whether employees are allowed to carry over accrued time or whether they have to be paid for such time upon their termination. Finally, these laws have varying rules on the amount of notice an employee must provide in order to take the leave, the documentation, if any, an employee may request to support the need for time off, and various other limitations. And perhaps the key thing here is that the failure to adhere to these rules can lead to significant penalties and open you up to a host of other employment-related claims.
Great. So following up on Michael's leave topic, we're seeing spikes in both short-term and long-term leave. A lot of it is still connected to COVID. If one person calls out, you may be able to flex and find another employee to fill in or simply just be short-staffed for that day. But it's critical to minimize those absences. Over the past 6 months or so, we've seen the COVID rate spike multiple times, including just recently, and leading to an increase in absences. To minimize these absences, many companies are now utilizing health attestations. And these attestations are simple questionnaires that employees fill out before coming to work. It essentially asks the employees if they have COVID symptoms or if they've been exposed. It usually lays out the groundwork guidelines on whether an employee should come into the office or not. But the goal here is really to minimize the exposure to your other employees. So while they might not think that them being sick isn't that big of a deal, you do not want that to spread to others, which would then create a larger situation. In our solution, we've also baked in employee sentiment into the survey as well. So as COVID spikes or it drops, so does the sentiment about coming in. And this can be a leading indicator of employee attrition as well.
Yeah, Dan, before we go to our next poll, just to comment on that, this is great emerging technology if folks out there haven't done something like this. And one of the reasons we're finding it to be really important is that traditionally absences and leave cases were something you had a little bit of time to plan for. Maybe not a sickness for a day or something like that, but a lot of people will come to work sick, right? And so in this situation here, these are absences that sometimes you have policies around that say, if you are sick or you take a test and you can't come to work. And so I think we're seeing an uptick in unplanned absences, whether it's due to COVID or other reasons. Sometimes it could be that you have to take care of someone who is sick or has fallen into some protocol. So we've seen employers express that, but beyond this newer, more emerging technology like you showed us, Dan, there's always the baseline leave and absence management technologies and software that are out there. So I encourage people to explore that. There's two really interesting things about it. One is it'll help with workflow management. So especially in the case of leave, if there's any documentation, if there's any reminders, if there's any return to work process that you have to keep track of, those software can help you with that. The other piece of it too is that people are just trying in general to be proactive about communications, and we know that can help with employee engagement. So now I'm going to move on to our second poll, which is, as you should be able to see that on the screen now. And the question is, are you seeing an increase in employee leave and absences? So 3 choices this time. Yes, a significant increase. Yes, some increase, or no increase. So take a moment and please reply. And if you don't know in your organization, it's fine to just refrain from answering. So Paul, when we're ready? Great. Okay, so it looks like, what's that, 72% of folks out there have seen some increase, 18% a significant increase, and only 18% no increase. So it's definitely becoming increasingly more important. And I think one of the things probably for the folks on the phone, I'm going to venture a guess since a lot of people here are with the HR executive subscriber base or followers, is HR practitioners need access to these systems to manage these cases, and a lot of them are working from home or in a hybrid situation. So having a system online, it gives people access to all that information to keep these processes moving without having to have physical access to file folders back in the office and things like that. So another benefit of technology in this case. All right, so with that, I'm going to just share quickly a couple of additional data points. You'll all get a copy of this presentation if you want it, so you can review these in greater detail. But really, the point here with the slide that's on the screen was just to show you that there is this cycle, this interconnectivity between absences, productivity, and employee engagement. and they're all interrelated. And in many ways, how you handle an absence and people's return to work can affect engagement and their satisfaction, and in turn, that can affect their productivity in the form of defects, affect your business in the form of profitability. It can even affect future absenteeism and their likeliness to call in sick. And I think we all know that we want to just minimize absenteeism as much as possible. One of the main reasons is that I think, all know that the cost and the productivity of replacement workers can be quite prohibitive to your business. So I hope that that's a topic that folks are interested in spending more time on, and we'd be happy to speak with you about it. So the next topic for compliance is scheduling. So I'm going to turn it back to Michael for more.
Thanks, Jim. So workforce management was arguably the most impacted pillar of the HCM portfolio as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've seen changes throughout almost all the workforce management modules, including scheduling, data collection, and leave management. And a good example of changes to the scheduling modules pertains to the ongoing enactment of predictive scheduling laws, which I'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide. So beginning in 2014, San Francisco enacted the first predictive scheduling law to provide employees with more scheduling predictability. Since 2014, there are currently 9 states and municipalities within those states with predictive, or what is sometimes referred to as fair scheduling laws. These laws have been focused primarily on the retail, food, and hospitality industries. While the laws vary by jurisdiction, they're all similar in that they require employers to post schedules well in advance and provide penalties against employers who deviate from the schedule. And those penalties are typically paid to the impacted employees. The triggering of a penalty is often a very minor increase or decrease in hours. However, the penalties payable to employees for such changes is typically anything but minor and can add up quickly. In addition to providing employees with a predictable schedule they can rely upon, these laws are also intended to prevent employees from working excessive hours by mandating minimum hours in between shifts and prohibiting a practice known as clopening. And that's where an employee works the shift closing the business and is then scheduled to open the location the next day. The bottom line is that all of these laws share a common need for applying the detailed rules consistently in order to avoid potentially large penalties for making even the slightest changes to an employee's schedule without providing the requisite notice mandated under each of the laws. While there are only a handful of jurisdictions right now with these types of laws or regulations, similar rules will likely be enacted in the not-too-distant future. So now let's hear a little bit more about how scheduling issues can impact your business.
Thanks. Gone are the days of scheduling just your hourly population. We've seen the use of scheduling increase throughout the pandemic. Every couple of years, we do a market assessment, and the one that we just finished, more and more salary workers are now being scheduled, particularly in the larger companies, as compared to our last assessment back in 2018. Many companies are now scheduling populations that they didn't schedule before, like salaried workers. This might be to alternate days in the office or alternate shifts. It might be to limit capacity, based on a state or local government regulation, spread those workers out around the office. We've also seen staggering of shifts to reduce the number of people at clocks or at security checkpoints, or in places where they utilize, say, like a locker room where people might change or leave their belongings throughout their shift. So we've seen kind of shifts offset by 5, 10, 15 minutes as well. Next slide. And with the Great Resignation going on, it's critical for you not only it's critical for you to not only backfill your vacancies, but also prevent those future resignations. And you can do so by really engaging your employees and give them the tools to help them input their schedules, facilitate easy changes, everything without having to talk to their boss or their scheduling manager. Collaborative scheduling, as we call it, gives employees a say in their schedule. Employees can give input beforehand. They can provide their availability or their unavailability. Managers and practitioners, should ensure that, the pertinent skills are in each user's profile to ensure when they're scheduling someone to do their job, they're actually match those requirements. Then once the schedule is ready to go, they publish it. And in publishing that schedule to employees, it's critical to give them control over adjusting those schedules. Whether it's swapping with a friend or giving a shift to a coworker without taking them back, or even just dropping a shift altogether. It's critical to give the flexibility to the employees. And employees are really feeling the increase in costs, from everything from food to gas nowadays. And so it's also been critical to give hourly workers the ability to pick up extra shifts, publish open shifts, let them select shifts to earn extra money. And all of these, whether it's open shifts or swapping shifts, should all be done in the context of wage and hour laws, including preventing employees from picking up shifts to put them into overtime or other premium pay situations. But we've seen when employees have greater control over their schedule, they're usually happier.
Yeah, Dan, I think that these are a great set of tips, and there's probably folks out there who say, this is a great idea, but it makes me nervous. And I would again just say that's a big part of where the technology comes in. I think, historically it's been really hard to be flexible and give people what they're looking for because it's just hard. And, a lot of times the attitudes are, well, no, here's the schedule, and I'm sorry, but, if you need to make a change, then, we're just going to have to find somebody else. But today it doesn't have to be that way at all. And people can really work together to find schedules that work for everybody, for sure. And all the while having a system that can govern the rules and make sure that you are paying attention to compliance along the way and having the system help you with that. So lots of really great technology out there these days to help with this. And so that really leads us into our next poll, and that is about scheduling and what you're seeing out there. And the question is, have you noticed a recent desire for more flexible scheduling from your employees? Same three choices: yes, a significant increase; yes, some increase; or no increase. So take a moment, please, and let us know what you're seeing. I am not seeing any results yet, Paul. There they are. Great. Okay. Wow. All right. So 79%, is that right? Yeah, 79% of folks said there is some increase in desires for flexible scheduling, and I really hope people have found a way, one way or another, to accommodate those needs. Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? We have done this poll a few times on webinars and then also in a more formal survey that we conducted recently, and we've seen as many as 92% expressing that employees are sharing an increased desire for more flexible schedules. So it is absolutely something that's out there. And as Dan said, in this challenging labor market, we think that if you can get this right, it really can turn this and do that proactively. It can really turn it into a retention and hiring advantage for your business. Okay, so we're going to move on to our fourth and final compliance topic, and that is around biometrics. Michael.
Sure, thanks, Jim. So our final topic is biometrics, and perhaps you could say we saved the best for last here. And biometrics is the use of someone's unique physical characteristics as a means of identification, and it can be a very powerful tool, convenient tool, and helpful to employers. But there are also real compliance issues that you need to be aware of. The use of biometrics has been increasing in recent years and is a very heavily regulated area. It's imperative that you know the legislation based on the jurisdictions where your business operates in order to avoid a number of expensive legal pitfalls. Of the states that have standalone biometric privacy laws, Illinois has the most comprehensive one. It requires companies to obtain written permission before collecting a person's fingerprints, facial scans, or other identifying biological characteristics. The Illinois law, which is commonly referred to as BIPA, has spurred a wave of legislatures to consider similar measures. While a few have been enacted, many new laws are under consideration and could become law in the near future, meaning that employers need to be out in front on these issues because compliance failure can be very costly. There have been a number of privacy cases in the news. Recently, a large tech company agreed to pay approximately $650 million in order to settle a class action lawsuit over its use of facial recognition technology in the state of Illinois. The important thing is that if you plan to use biometrics, it's important to make sure that you understand the implications of doing so and that you're in the best position to comply with the developing laws. Leveraging technology into your collection process is one of the best ways to help you meet your obligations and limit risk. We'll now hear about some of ADP's alternative time collection offerings. Dan?
Thanks. So biometrics, specifically fingerprint, has always been the number one way that clients have looked to avoid buddy punching, letting one person punch in for someone else. However, because of COVID, we've seen a trend away from fingerprint biometrics to other solutions that employees don't need to physically touch. There's a number of great alternatives. I mean, everyone's workplace is different, so you need to figure out kind of which method would work with your employees because not all options may work in all environments. Facial recognition is an excellent alternative to finger scan biometrics, and it also identifies employees and prevents buddy punching. If you're in a business where you give your employees mobile devices or in situations where employees can use their own devices, mobile apps are a great alternative. Most mobile apps, including all of ADP's, have geofencing and geopinning capabilities, so you always know where your person is working, whether they're within the designated place where they're supposed to be working or not, just as I mentioned before. IVR is another great option, and this is where an employee can call in and follow voice prompts to clock in or out. You can even whitelist phone numbers to ensure your employees are only calling in from a particular location. And for shared time clocks and kiosks, there's also capabilities such as proximity badge readers and barcode scanners, even NFC devices. You can stick a little sticker on someone's ID card to allow them to clock in without actually touching anything.
Yeah, these are really great examples, Dan, of some of the newer technology that's out there. And I'd just say, a couple of things we've observed, if you had any comment to add. We saw mobile adoption take off with COVID. I think a lot of people who previously weren't either comfortable with it or didn't want to ask people to clock in or use their phones came around and said, that's one of the best ways to do this is, have people use their own phones, and that just, gets around any fears of people using shared devices and things like that. I think, things have evolved in our understanding of COVID in particular, but what has stuck is that people like it. They liked it. They liked the flexibility of using their own phone and things like that. So where it's possible, I think people have let that continue, and I think that options like geofencing and geopinning and things like that really help you feel more comfortable as employers knowing where people are clocking in and out from has really been a wonderful advancement. So, all right, so with that was our final compliance topic. And so I wanted to let I asked Dan to just talk a little bit about ADP as a compliance resource as a whole. So we do webinars like we're doing today all the time. We've got all kinds of experts who are ADP employees who spend a lot of time monitoring things on our clients' behalf. And we've put together a few solutions and resources for the folks out there. So Dan, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, as seen through the handful of topics we've covered today, the wage and hour landscape is constantly changing. And it's not just at the federal or state level, but also at the local level. And it's virtually impossible to stay on top of all these changes manually. To help out with this, we've created a tool to support our client practitioners. It's bundled with our workforce management solution and really leverages all of the content that ADP creates today. It leverages all of our subject matter experts and all the work, all the research that we do to put into our product, we're actually putting into this product called Compliance on Demand. It's a self-service platform, and it provides content that focuses on U.S. federal, state, and local regulatory compliance content as it relates to workforce management. And it has 4 key pillars. So obviously I just mentioned the content part of it, thousands of articles, webinars, and more. And you can actually identify the geographies that you work in or that your company works in and get email notifications about changes in legislations in those jurisdictions. A compliance calendar, which is up to date, keeping track of important milestones such as minimum wage changes, effective dates for new sick leave laws, and so on. There's an online community where subscribers can actually have discussions with their peers at other companies. So, you might be doing this alone in your company. Well, you can reach out to some of your peers in other companies and see what they're doing about certain rules and regulations. And finally, there's a consulting aspect where you can speak with a SHRM certified ADP associate, or you can even speak with our employment law partner, Jackson Hewitt, if you're looking for legal advice, and it's all included. And finally, I was recently awarded the Bronze Award for Best Advance in Time Labor Management from Brandon Hall. But we see this as a key aspect to partner with our clients and ensure that they remain compliant in this ever-changing landscape.
That's great, Dan. Thank you for that overview. And just a little note, if I could add on Compliance on Demand, is one of the main reasons we put this together was that we were finding that organizations were left to interpret a lot of this stuff on their own, and that meant that distributed HR teams were all kind of coming up with their own flavor of the policies and laws and regulations. So what we found is this is a really nice one-stop shop, not just for initial education, but for education on ongoing topics to keep the whole organization on the same page, which has really been quite a success for folks. So, and as Dan mentioned, this is available with ADP Workforce Management Solutions. The topics contained within Compliance on Demand are wage and hour related. All right, so with that, it's going to bring us to our final poll. Give that a second for that to pop up. And the question is, are you considering a change or an upgrade to your workforce management practices and technology? So we are curious if you are actively looking. Maybe you're not quite looking and you've just started discussions, or if you have no plans to make any changes or upgrades. Maybe today's presentation gave you some ideas. That would be good. But we'll take a minute to respond. And we'll take a minute here to see what our results look like. Okay, good. So there's a good number of folks out there. 36% say that they're looking. Again, we have resources available for you. I'll share the website in a minute, but it's adp.com/WFM, as in workforce management. That's got some resources for you. We'll be sharing a copy of today's presentation as well. And with that, I'm going to pop open our Q&A, and let's see. First question was, with regard to exempt employees, how does it affect the reporting by not having them in time and attendance? So I think that means exempt employees. You can have exempt employees in your time and attendance system. So I know in ADP in particular, we have pretty robust capabilities. And so now the primary reason for using it often is to track when people have taken their vacation and their time off. So it's, we would put what would be an assumed 40-hour work week and a normal schedule on someone's time card, and then they would report time off. They could request time off. It could be approved in the system. And so those hours that they'd taken off would come out of their accrued time off, and we can maintain those balances in the system. So you can have that information out there. And when you do reporting, because that was part of the question, is you can either exclude those folks or you can include those folks when it comes to hours worked, and so forth. So just know that there are systems that will accommodate both and actually optimize the timekeeping experience for whichever audience or whichever population each person falls into. There was another question here. Let's see. Dan, this one's a good one for you. Does ADP offer an IVR punch option? This person's staff uses a mix of different kinds of punching and access to ADP, and is curious if IVR would be available as a backup. And maybe explain what IVR is for the audience real quick.
Yeah, definitely. So IVR is available. So IVR is the ability for you to call into a phone number and you'd enter, let's say, your employee ID, and then you'd press 1 to punch in or 2 to punch out. Just like if you called, a company and you have to submit different, you have to answer questions using numbers. Same thing here. So you'd call into a phone number that would be dedicated to your company. It would authenticate that user, understand, hey, this is Dan Hennis, and then you would say, you clock in, or you'd punch 1, you'd punch 2, or you'd punch 3, and you can transfer, things like that. So it is available. It is widely used. We see it a lot with populations who do not have mobile phones prevalent. So we see that a lot. We see where people might be using it in places where they don't have a desk or computer. So think about a janitorial supply company, things like that. Those are the types of people we see use it a lot, but it is available to all clients as an option, and definitely reach out to your account executive if you're interested in learning more.
Excellent. And there's 2 others I'll answer very quickly because we are at the top of the hour. Someone asked if we have a module for creating and publishing schedules, and the simple, quick answer is yes, we do within our workforce management solutions. So please reach out if you would like to find out more about that. Another question was, would they have access to compliance on demand if they have access to HR on demand? The answer is those are separate solutions. But depending on your relationship with ADP and which of our workforce management solutions you use, you might be entitled to access to compliance on demand. So follow up with ADP for more specifics. And that was, I believe, the extent of the questions, and I know it's the extent of the time, unfortunately, that we have with you today. So with that, I will say thank you very much. We will try to follow up with any questions that we might have missed one-on-one. And I'll just say best of luck with all of your compliance and workforce management responsibilities and efforts. Please reach out with any questions. We are here to help. But that concludes today's event, and I wish everybody a wonderful remainder of your day and a very relaxing and I'm sure well-deserved Memorial Day weekend.